Hi, my name is Eun-Suk Jang. I'm an assistant dean at the College of Letters and Science at University of Wisconsin-Madison. I am extremely honored to be here with these amazing, respected scholars to discuss the compatibility between Islam and democracy in Indonesia. I would like to especially thank Dr. Professor Didik Robini, who kindly invited me and offered to host a public debate on Sunday. I know this is the off day, and thank you so much for everybody coming here. And I know that I'm not sure. I know that I would actually learn a lot from all of you. And I consider this as the sort of intellectual discussion that we can learn from one another and also exchange ideas. So my role, given that I have these distinguished speakers right next to me, I thought my job here will be more to brings the literature, political science literature about religion, like Islam and politics and what has been discussed. And I will highlight the parts that are relevant to Indonesia. So this will just bring the sort of seed for discussion. And then I would expect everybody to discuss all together. And as our outstanding moderator just mentioned, the question might be, right? The question is Islam compatible with the democracy might be actually outdated, right? As he also mentioned that Indonesia already a democracy. No democracy in the world is perfect, right? Democracy is on a spectrum, not in a binary state, which means it's not yes or no. And Indonesia truly made a huge progress. So my answer to that will be yes. Islam is compatible with the democracy, as much as any other religion will be compatible with democracy. And democracy can be crafted anywhere in the world. In 1950s, people look at Korea and they thought this country has no future. But now we see differently. So there's nothing that it is destined, right, to be a certain way. However, then what do we need to, but still there's something that concerns us when it comes to democracy will be that we are concerned about democratic backsliding. That democratic backsliding can be named democratic regression or democratic recession. There are many names for it that it is happening everywhere or so many places in the world since 2006. So Indonesia is not alone or about worrying about the future of democracy. We see same concerns with the Trump in the United States under Trump, right? And India under Modi. And I can name it, go on and on and on. So there are so many countries, right? So backsliding that we are looking at around the world is about state-led debilitation or elimination of the political institutions that sustain existing democracy. So what you can focus here is state-led, right? Elected officials intentionally eliminating some institutions that it is integral to democracy, right? So so what happens is that it deteriorates the quality of democracy. And that's the democratic backsliding. And like 1980s and 1990s, what we see is more of coup d'etat or, vote fraud or or executive coup and all those things. We don't see that anymore, or very rarely. But what we see in the world is a very gradual, right? Very gradual erosion of democratic rights. And this is not only happening in Indonesia, but countries that I also love, in addition to Indonesia, it's happening in South Korea, is happening in the United States. And those are just a couple of examples, but it's actually everywhere. So why? Why is that? And it could happen in not only all democracies, right? Like United States has a way longer history, the democratic history, than any other countries. But with the Trump, I still remember many of my friends says, "Oh, America's democracy will be intact because we have a long history of institution, even if Trump get elected." But what happens? Once Trump got elected, he has an executive ban on Muslims in certain countries. That was one of the first executive order that he actually instituted, and many more. So you see that even the long even the democracies with the long tradition can be undermined by those elected figures. So and we see more and more countries that are become more intolerant and illiberal. So what is so democratic backsliding in Indonesia that we are concerned about, not because it's Islam, right? It's not because of certain religion. It is more of that the politics and religion has a certain dynamics that when you have a different kind of religious people with different religions, their policy that regulate those will be needed. So, for example, a lot of scholars now talk about democratic regression. If you look at the political science literature about Indonesia, a lot of in the beginning of course, reformasi, democratization. Now we're looking at democratic recession, democratic regression, democratic erosion, or some people will go even authoritarian turn to use the kind of what's going on in Indonesia. And one of the label internationally that Indonesia gets, although, again, this doesn't undermine all the achievement that Indonesian people made in order and sacrifice in order to maintain the democracy, but it is called illiberal democracy. And illiberal democracy is defined as a regime in which population can effectively choose their own leaders, which is correct, right? But in where there are serious constraints on civil liberties or the rule of law. So Indonesia is doing great job electing their own leaders. But in terms of civil liberties here can be measured on freedom of media or censorship or freedom of assembly, freedom of political associations, and non-discriminatory rule of law, depending on like who you are, and freedom from unjustified political terror, and or socioeconomic rights, and freedom from corruption. And all these things are the indicators that we look at, and Indonesia is still need to make progress on these parts. So I'll go back to then, why is this happening, right? So now we established that it's happening around the world, and Indonesia is not an exception. Indonesia is one of those the countries in the world. But then why that democratic backsliding happening at a theoretical level before we go down to Indonesia per se? And some scholars mention it is a polarization, political, social polarization by elite. Not that people hate against each other, right? We joke about different Islamic organizations and so forth. And we do have universities like Medina, very pluralistic. I mean, often our chancellor is joking about being small university, but it's an incredibly impactful university, right? Very strong, very influential university there. So when these kind of polarization in a society actually happening by elite or even by movements, and they can lead to the tolerance of illiberalism because people think the other group as an enemy. And this kind of polarize, and they don't want to protect other groups' rights. And this kind of polarization creates a zero-sum perceptions. If you don't win, you lose. And this kind of attitude of zero-sum politics or zero-sum perceptions makes it also heighten the perception of threat that you are under attack. It's like in America, now we have white nationalists. They think that immigrants are threat. Immigrants are taking a job away from, from the white people. And they justify their attack against the immigrants or any minorities. And they think that they are the people of the land, but others do not have a right. And that's the sort of the right-wing people that they heighten the threat perception in that way. So that's the one of the way we look at polarization, and unless we solve the polarization will be a big issue. The other thing is that democracy is actually undermined by elected autocrats, or also subsequent capture of political institutions by elected autocrats. I don't think that by no means President Joko Widodo is elected autocrats at all. So I'm not saying that. However, sometimes when the elected leader can introduce the laws and regulation could possibly make the democratic laws go backward, right? So it means that they can actually capture or compromise political institutions by increasing, say, like military's power, or by increasing certain people's power and decreasing certain people's power and so forth, that it can be done by a legitimately elected leader using legitimate ways that often it's very difficult for citizens to go against those kind of legitimate action. Although outcome of that legitimate action could be actually fatal to some of the minority groups or some of the groups that will lose their power. Or another third one that I will talk about will be when elites are unwilling to redistribute, right? That's just sharing the income, helping out with inequality. That poor are voting in favor of redistribution, but the class conflict, but then politicians unwilling to do so, the class conflict rises and elites resort to authoritarian control over citizens. So when, say, government introduced the corporate-friendly policies and they ignore the rights of laborers, then this could end with when laborers will say workers resent or workers make a movement, and the government just crack down on those movements, that will be a sort of leading towards authoritarian control. And so we do have all different kind of explanations, and these explanations are not necessarily looking at Indonesia per se, but I do think that there's some relevance in Indonesia with these theories that are developed in political science by a lot of scholars. So what is it then what we need to think about? And what are the suggestions that are proposed by scholars in the field, political science? And I also agree with these ideas. Again, Indonesia made a remarkable achievement in history, world history, by instituting democracy, and have come so far, because I still remember in 1998, people are worrying about the disintegration of Indonesia with the sectarian conflicts, religious conflicts. And there was an article about, like, will Indonesia be next Yugoslavia? Right? So now we laugh about it, like, who thought that, right? But back then, it was a real concern in 1998. But now, look at right now, right? That in 2022, we do not have that concern. But what can be done better, right? How can we even improve more of Indonesian democracy to be actually the example? Because it's a very rare for multi-ethnic, multi-religious states to achieve the democracy and maintain the democracy. It's not because it's Indonesia. It is difficult. It is, and political science that who studies democracy say that. It's not that it's impossible to achieve, maintain, but it actually takes a lot more challenge to handle it. So what do we need to do? So again, as you know, election is not enough. And one of the scholars will say mutual tolerance, right? It's not that we need a very special way of dealing with the democracy. Answer is actually very simple. Is mutual tolerance and institutional forbearance. I want to speak a little bit more about institutional forbearance, which means that basically elected officials cannot use their power to limit any citizen's rights because of their religious or any kind of identity. That any citizen in the country should have same rights. That somebody's rights should not be discriminated because of any reasons. That's institutional. That's the norm. That's the norm that has to be instituted in the society, that discriminating certain group cannot be a norm. The second is Alfred Stephan, which is the very famous political scientist, mentioned twin tolerations. He passed away. He actually visited Indonesia. I hear very strong yes. So I'm sure somebody might have. Okay. So yeah, he visited Indonesia and did research. Jakarta and Aceh. He visited multiple cities. And Stephan says we need twin tolerations, right? Twin tolerations is here. I got the definition from the book, is that the minimal boundaries, not maximal, minimal boundaries of freedom of action that must be crafted for political institutions, right? Vis-a-vis religious authorities, and for religious individuals and groups vis-a-vis political institutions. What that means is that political institution has to be able to accommodate the place for any religious groups in, whether they like them or not, right? they have to give them a space. And also religious groups cannot just say you can like push the political institutions to be intolerant, right? It goes both ways. Otherwise, if we don't have those twin tolerations, that democracy can be easily undermined. And this is not just about Islam per se. We see many religions, right? Any religion can be fundamentalistic. Any religion can be detrimental to democracy because religion is a very powerful. But it all depends on how people use religion that will shape politics. So I'll leave that here at the more theoretical level, and I look forward to learning from our fellow Pumbizarat.